for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live, that is. Wednesday morning, October 2nd, we've rolled into the exhibition season. This is the month where things really start to ramp up. It's why John Calipari had his second State of the Union address yesterday at Bud Walton Arena. Of course, the first one was back in late July to recap the limited summer work, mini break before the start of the fall semester, and things have really started to ramp up. So Calipari touched on some of that, not in great detail. We're going to get into that. We also got some intel on recruiting, and I'm going to open with recruiting today. By the way, I'm Kevin McPherson. Thank you once again for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. Please go hit subscribe and like and share the content if you can. We hope you like it. But, you know, things I mentioned ramping up. I think Arkansas is getting real momentum. I think there's real momentum. There may be a question mark still on some of this recruiting stuff, simply because until you get to the finish line and if things don't play out, you're like, well, where was the momentum? I think there's some things that have stood out to me in the last several days, some intel that I've gotten, but also just some developments that anybody can see. Some of this stuff I've tweeted about. When we look at some of these 5-stars, it's really a smorgasbord of 5-star recruiting with John Calipari. You expect nothing but that, and it's been that way in Arkansas so far. We know Darius Acuff Jr. Well, let's just get it on the record again. Arkansas has a top 10 commitment already. The first school to get a 5-star commitment. I think maybe still the only one with a consensus top 10 rated 5-star. Darius Acuff Jr., the 6'3" point guard out of Detroit, plays at IMG Academy. And we're going to talk a little bit more about him in a little bit. But the idea is that that's momentum in of itself, because it happened in late July and he visited way back in May. You know, it's one of the, fan bases, and in recruiting, it's like, well, what's next? What's next? What have you done for me lately? What, getting quiet around here, but it's really not. Arkansas is doing the work. John Calipari and his staff are doing the work. And at the end of the day, it's Calipari's brand and a strong Arkansas basketball program. It's been a strong program historically. So it's not like there's a ton of question marks surrounding not only the environment, but the coach. It's just a matter of timing on some of these things. And so with Acuff, the next piece, in my opinion, to talk about, are the first one today about guys who are uncommitted and who Arkansas is after. Let's start with Malik Thomas, because this is visit week. We think by this weekend, October 4th through the 6th, a couple of days from now at some point, that Malik Thomas is going to arrive for an official visit to Arkansas. He has twice postponed visits, one back in late June, coming off the heels of that UConn visit. It was thought by a lot that he's probably going to commit to UConn. I was one of those that thought UConn later until we hear something otherwise. He told me at that time, I'm postponing this visit. He didn't use the word cancel, and we'll see. He said, I'm postponing it and going to reset a date. But then again, the momentum, it looked like UConn. So July was a dead period. You had all the live eval stuff going on, and he was taking part in that and going out there and proving why he's one of the top players in the country. And since that time, he's come back. And as far as I know, he still hasn't taken a visit. That's the interesting thing. He's scheduled 2. Arkansas and Alabama. Arkansas, the middle weekend of September, the only time in the month of September that Arkansas football had a game in Fayetteville on the home campus where you could bring in visitors. He didn't make it to that, but we talked about it beforehand. We said, look, this is likely going to move to in the first weekend of October, when Arkansas is going to host Tennessee, the first real marquee matchup in Fayetteville. And you're in October. You didn't have anything like that in September, just the one game against Alabama and Birmingham. So we said this was going to happen, and sure enough, was able to confirm that. Had been tweeting and talking about on these platforms, expecting this to be probably moved out, and it was. Interesting thing, at the time when it looked like he was coming in mid-September, it looked like Alabama was going to get a visit 2 weeks later, this past weekend, this 27th of September through the 29th that we just went through. Then when we knew he was moving the Arkansas visit to October 4th through 6th, of those 2 known visits, Arkansas was getting the last visit. I have seen nothing that tells me that Malik Thomas was on campus in Tuscaloosa over the weekend. In fact, all evidence that I have suggests that he wasn't there. You don't really see or hear a lot of talk about this from some of the national guys, except not what they're publishing, but behind the scenes. I don't think Malik Thomas was there. I think he missed that visit. If someone's got some kind of photographic, some kind of evidence that he was there, I need to see it. He put nothing on his social media. There was out at the Alabama-Georgia football game of Nate Oates walking around with recruits. AJ DeBonsa, Braden Burry's another 5-star guard from out west in that 2025 class. A 2-guard or a wing, similar to what the position slot is, I think, for Malik Thomas. And then you saw a class of 2026 recruit Caleb Holt, who, by the way, Arkansas has been recruiting. Calipari's seen him play. I was there courtside with Calipari watching Caleb Holt play against Coapeet back in May in Texas. But Arkansas has been at least twice at Grayson High School in the Atlanta area to see Caleb Holt so far during this recruiting period. But either way, those were the 3 players you saw in the video. No sign of Malik Thomas with the other recruits all in tow with Nate Oates walking around the field at that football game. And so, you piece it all together, I don't think he made that trip. I think this is real momentum for Arkansas, because what have I been saying? If Malik Thomas comes on campus, I don't care where else he visits. Alabama, this was what we were on a week ago, Wednesday. So before we knew he didn't make the Alabama trip, I said, I don't care where else he visits. I think Arkansas, if they get him on campus, he's Calipari's to lose. Is this momentum? The other team to me that's still out there that we haven't heard about a visit that he could set something up for later this month. And if it comes out while we're on here, somebody let me know. Of course, I do a poor job of even being able to read the comments. And sometimes things break while I'm doing this. But unless Malik Thomas sets up a visit to Kansas State or somebody else comes more into the picture, I've got some people asking me about Caleb Wilson and Coapeet with question marks. But getting back to Malik Thomas, unless another school comes in the picture, to me, it's maybe Kansas State. It's in his final 7. Thomas allegedly has a visit scheduled for Kansas State. All right, so he's making that comment. I've heard chatter that that's probably going to happen or maybe to happen. I haven't seen a date. I haven't seen it put out there. So having said that, that remains to be seen. The thing now is, does he make it to Arkansas's campus? That's the key here. That's what I want to focus on. He's already postponed or rescheduled twice. The fact that dates for new visits have emerged is a different talking point than, well, it just kind of came and went and we don't know anything else and it doesn't look like it's happening. And there's been at least one example of that so far with Coapeet. That's after he didn't make his visit. It's been really quiet. No talks of, you see nothing about, well, he's going to move it out to here now. That, I guess, could still happen. I doubt it, but I guess it could. But with Malik Thomas, there's always been another landing spot for a visit to Arkansas. He told me when I interviewed him back in May, I know that's been a while, but he loved Cal. You could tell it was genuine. There's already a relationship there. And he said he was definitely interested in Arkansas and wanted to visit. So I think he wants to visit, or why else would there be these dates scheduled and set out? He's visited way back when Auburn and Pittsburgh, the hometown school. He's from Pittsburgh, plays now at Overtime Elite. 6'4" guard, by the way, Malik Thomas, 5-star, top 10 rated. I think most of the, he's in the consensus, he's probably a composite 7th ranked player in that 2025 class, which is loaded. So there's no shame in being in the top 10. In fact, in many seasons in other recruiting classes, some of these guys would be ranked in the top 2 or 3. That's how strong I think this class is. All right, but Malik Thomas, by the way, just picked up, I think he was named the MVP of the recent Overtime Elite Combine, and there's some studs on that in that Overtime Elite program. Jasper Johnson, who's committed to the home state school, Kentucky, a 5-star, just ranked outside of the top 10 in some of the services, playing in that organization. But Malik Thomas continues to rack up accolades, whatever event, whatever scenario he's in. So you understand why he's rated so highly. But I've said for a while, I've got one source that said when these visits, the dust settles on visits, whatever Thomas does, Arkansas is going to get him. I've got other folks I talk to, maybe one you'd call a source. They're not so sure about that. I remain teetering, except that if Calipari finally does get him on campus, I think it's advantage Arkansas, and Arkansas then at that point, in my mind, is the leader. Something else would have to happen or develop for Arkansas not to be the leader. UConn, we talked about that visit in June. Malik Thomas, UConn just got a commitment from a similar positional player, Darius Adams, a top 20 rated, some services a 4-star. I think he's a 5-star, maybe in the composite. Someone's got him as a 5-star, but just came off the board to UConn. Picked the Huskies over Michigan State, and I'm trying to remember who else he was looking at. But that's the landing spot for Darius Adams. They're also recruiting Braylon Mullins, been recruiting a Caden Lewis. And, I think a Caden Lewis is taking a visit to Duke. Kentucky's been on him for a while, but some of these names we mentioned in terms of would a Malik Thomas go to a place where some of these other guys might land? You say, well, what's the difference between that and him going where Darius Acuff is? Another 5-star backcourt player. Because Acuff to me is more, even though he's a scoring lead guard, he is a legitimate lead guard. 6'2", 6'3" range, good length, can play some bully ball. But I think these guys complement each other. And I think Calipari's track record of bringing in multiple guys that play in the backcourt or the front line or on the wings that are highly rated and saying, look, we will make it work because look at my track record of delivering guys to the next level, the max contracts, all that stuff. So I think it makes sense for Malik Thomas to team up with Darius Acuff Jr. And I've said this, I'll say it again, if that happens, when and if that happens, Arkansas has, you can end discussions about who had the best recruiting class for backcourt. We're not talking about portal, we're talking about high-level guys coming out of the high school ranks that could be one-and-dones, which is huge. The story's over there. You could talk about other things. Who got the best small forward? Who's got the most versatile front line? Arkansas has locked up. If they get Malik Thomas, it's over. The discussion's over. Arkansas locked up the best high school backcourt in the country, 2 top 10 rated 5-stars in a class that's stronger than most. It's one of those classes that's stronger than most. So that's huge. So I think there's some momentum here in terms of what's going on in the background. But it all boils back down to, does Malik Thomas make it on campus? If he never makes it, this is out the window. There's at least, again, like I said, there's several sources that think Arkansas might be in the lead. One that's told me for a while it's going to be Arkansas when the dust settles. So we're going to see. All right, now I've got some intel here. I've got some intel here on Mika Murnin and his visit to Arkansas. I know people have asked me over at HogvilleNET on the website, on the recruiting board, and I've gotten these questions elsewhere. But Mika Murnin, the 6'10", pushing 6'11", combo forward at Arizona Compass Prep, AZ Compass Prep. Last year he was with Sunrise Christian Academy. Helped Brad Bill, was the MVP of the Nike Peach Jam E16, the 16 and under version of it, getting Brad Bill Elite to the title, and had 21 points in that title game. But just a versatile finish. 17-year-old, 6'10", 6'11", can, you look at his shooting splits just in that run at Nike. Peach Jam, 61% from the field, 50% on volume from three, and 90% from the free throw line. His soft skills, his face-up skills, his shooting skills are a thing of beauty, but he's athletic. He moves well. So this guy can cover a lot of ground with long strides, but he moves well. He's not one of those kind of stationary guys that he has touch, but he's not really doing a whole lot out there. Yeah, I mean, he plays above the rim. He can rebound and defend the rim. He'll block shots. So he's more than just all that polish on offense. But man, you love his craft as a 6'10", 6'11" guy. He's only 17. Was on the Finnish national team, Mika Murnin. So he took that Arkansas visit weekend before last. There was no football game on campus. I think it was the September 20th through the 22nd that weekend. And, he posted videos and photos from his his wearing the Razorback gear, all that came out, but it's really quiet, not much outside of that. So someone who has talked to him and shared some info with me, this is some intel. But previously, before visiting Arkansas, Murnin had been to visits to Utah and then more recently to Michigan. He also had a visit to Duke scheduled for this past weekend, but unlike his visits to Utah and Michigan and Arkansas, there was nothing on his Instagram showing him in any gear with Duke. There was nothing like that. And it was really quiet. I didn't see anything on social media with photos or him at a football game or whatever. There was nothing about Mika Murnin at Duke. So now I question, did he even take the visit to Duke? We're similar to Malik Thomas. I'm not sure that he did. To me, it's likely that he didn't take that visit. Now, maybe he did, but usually players that go visit Duke, you see the stuff splashing, somewhere on social media during the visit that they've arrived or something like that. Didn't see any of that on his Instagram. That's not the intel. What the intel is Mika Murnin, class of 2026, top 10 rated 5-star, strong candidate. I've said this over and over to reclass to 2025. The intel is someone who's talked to him post Arkansas visit said his Arkansas visit was the best yet. And it wasn't like it didn't sound like it was an incremental better. It sounded like it was substantially better. Now, reclass candidate. This is the key. You've got the early period coming up. To me, if you're considering a reclass and you're in 2026, when we see these things play out, we usually don't find out until the spring, until the player's gone through their junior season of eligibility and academically getting through school for that year. And then a lot of times we see them bump up after some of their postseason stuff that they do. And sometimes they even play a little bit on the grassroots circuit like Will Riley did, and then cut it off midstream because he reclassed up and then, went ahead and became a college freshman and joined the Illinois. So he was a 5-star from the 2025 class at reclass of 2024. And so the idea here is if he waits to the spring, a lot could happen. He was going to visit Kentucky. He says he's not going to visit there, at least for now. I don't think he took the Duke visit. So if he was reclassing now and was ready to sign early, which, I don't know if Calipari can talk him into doing that, then these things might matter a lot more in terms of he didn't go to Duke and he's telling people that the Arkansas visit was his best visit. That's been his best visit. And the way it was framed to me was there wasn't hesitation. It was an emphatic declaration that Arkansas opened his eyes. All right. So, but if you're waiting it out till the spring, there's chances he's going to take other visits, or it could be a situation where he really likes Arkansas and it's a matter of time. Then does he reclass? So that becomes very important. This guy's versatile, man. I see him as a 3-4 at the pro level, probably a stretch 4, maybe a similar to Trevor Brazile and what his role might be for Arkansas. Although I think because of Arkansas's thin front line, Brazile will be more of a 4-5. But certainly it has the ability to be a stretch 4. And I think Mika Murnin will be able to do that as well. Not sure that he can, he'd have to get stronger and grow a little bit more, which he might, have the physical brand to play and defend 5s in the SEC, but that may be a path for him. But certainly can be a versatile 4 for you, and might even be able to, even at the college level, be on the floor with 2 other bigs and slot in for a few minutes as a 3. But I think at the NBA, you'd definitely see that with him. But I think I think it's interesting. I think there's momentum here when you just start seeing some of the surrounding stuff. If Malik Thomas makes it on campus, Mika Murnin did, love the visit. If Malik Thomas gets there, I think Arkansas is clear leader. I'm going to say right now, just based on all I know, Murnin's visited Utah and Michigan and Arkansas. He liked Arkansas visit the best. Got that from a really good source, by the way, because they're basically telling me what he said. And then the Duke thing, I don't think happened. Again, maybe a long way to go with him, so we'll see how it plays out. All right. Another interesting thing I reported, I had a source call me. I was driving last week. I think it was Thursday. Was coming back. I'd covered Jonesboro high school basketball practice. I get around the state this time every year and go to high school basketball practices and start really putting together some of my thoughts on some of the top programs and players in the state, because I cover basketball throughout the state. I don't just talk about it, I actually go and get in the trenches and cover it. But I was driving back and I got an interesting phone call and someone said, "Hey man, Calipari was out to see Nate Ament." Nate Ament's a guy, when I covered him back in May, he was ranked, between 15th and 20th. He was a 5-star, 6'9" combo forward out of the Highland School in Virginia. And was on the Adidas circuit. So I was down in Texas and saw him play on the first day of that event. First time I'd seen him play in person that I remember. And he really stood out to me for multiple reasons. 6'9", he has the soft skills too, really good in 2-man game, just a smart player, excellent shooter. And I remember after I watched him play, and then Calipari was there the same day I was. It was the first live eval event, and Calipari watched him. And I was there watching Calipari watch him. And, I think Bruiser Flint was down there as well on Arkansas staff. And I just remember after that, I was like, man, I really want to get into talk to Ament. And I interviewed him, and I actually tweeted this out. The video's out on Twitter. You can search that. But he mentioned Arkansas's new staff had already been in touch with him. They'd already reached out. He mentioned that a little bit and said he had some curiosity and interest in Arkansas. Well, it's been really quiet with him. His recruitment's not as far along as some others, and he's got a lot of schools and some that are you don't hear the name Arkansas when you start hearing maybe some schools in his wheelhouse. But John Calipari was in Virginia to see at least a couple of players last week, and that was one of them. I got this phone call. It was kind of out of the blue. I wasn't expecting that because we really haven't heard Arkansas Nate Ament much and lately. And so for what it's worth, but Ament has been a star. When you look at some of the all-star platforms and some of the other things outside of grassroots play, I talked about seeing him in May in person along with Calipari being there. Calipari also watched him on the Adidas circuit in July when those live evals started back up. So Calipari took time and has seen him multiple times. But I think what really stood out to me was I said at the time, I remember thinking, why is this guy ranked 18th or whatever he was? I'm like, this is a top 10. There's not 10 players better than him. And how good this class is, there's not 10 better. And there may only be a handful, maybe, that are better. Sure enough, he's like most services now have him in the top 5. So he's where he needs to be in that class of 2025. Native Mint, super nice kid. I really like his game, man. There's not much not to like about it. I think the big thing with him is a 6'9", 3'4", another 3'4" at the college level. It certainly will be a wing, I believe, a Michael Porter Jr. type at the NBA level. So you might, in some small ball scenarios, he could play the 4 even at the NBA level as he gets stronger. But he needs to add strength. All the shooting skills there, the understanding of the game. He's a good passer off action. He understands how to play already at a young age. He's going to get better, but I notice when he tries to penetrate and really, go attack when he's run off the 3 line, or that's the opening he's given, he's still learning how to deal with that physical part of the game and finishing through contact because he understands how to get to spots. But getting all the way, and the further he goes, I notice a little bit of contact. But anyway, I don't want to get too much in the weeds on that. I love it, Nate Ament. Let's see if there's any traction here with John Calipari and Ament. Calipari was also in Virginia and saw Jordan Smith Jr., class of 2026, I think out of Fairfax, Virginia. So, Calipari made the most of that. This all happened last week. Smith's a 6'3" guard. Calipari had actually seen him multiple times. One of those times was when Cal went to Europe. I believe it was Istanbul. Where was the 17U FIBA World Cup? Team USA ran over the competition, gold medal, won every game. Calipari was out there for a part of that, and Jordan Smith was on that team playing up with a lot of 2025 guys like AJ DeBonsa, the Boozer twins, some of those guys. And so this is not a new player, Jordan Smith Jr., and another 5-star, top 10 rated guy in that class of 2026. So that's just sort of some of the recency in terms of what Calipari's done on the road. One thing that stood out to me over the weekend, the Wooten's camp, you don't hear as much about that. You hear about a lot of these camps. Wooten's is one that's been around for several years. And it used to be played in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Clutch hates Cal. We're going to talk about some of this stuff. But the Wooten's camp is a McDonald's All-American platform event. And what that means is Paul Biancardi, ESPN has a lot of connectivity to the McDonald's game process because it's, ESPN's where I think the McDonald's game is shown. I think they have exclusive rights to show live telecast some of the practices and scrimmages and some of the other events around it. But either way, the Wooten's camp was this weekend, and now it's played in Las Vegas. And it's like a lot of these other platforms, but for all-star camps, it's 100 or so, 80, 75 to 100, sometimes more than 100 players, the top players around the country, mostly 2025, 2026, some 2027. But it's very interesting to me because you also have NBA scouts in for this, and it's a weekend of stuff. So it's basically an all-star camp, but you're showcasing, and it's a platform for the decision makers on that panel, that board of whatever deciders for the McDonald's All-American All-Star Game rosters each year. And so this is an opportunity to showcase. And I just thought it was interesting. Darius Acuff Jr., future Hogger, I mentioned I'd get back to, was one of the top performers according to Paul Biancardi, ESPN's top recruiting analyst. One of the top performers. He put out a short list. Remember, it's a lot of players around the country representing multiple classes, but 3 names stood out to me. Darius Acuff Jr. is one of the top performers. Remember, at the Nike Skills Academy a few weeks ago, he got back to me, and I talked to an NBA scout that said, look, the way he played in that with a bunch of 5-star dudes and some college dudes over there, he looks like he's on a trajectory to not only be a first-round draft pick, potentially a lottery pick. All right. But Acuff stood out as expected at the Wooten's camp, Coach Wooten's camp, as did Sean Abayev. This is another platform where he, amongst other great players, where Abayev, who's not a 5-star, ranked just inside the top 30 in that 2025 class. We've talked a lot about him because not only did Chuck Martin go out to see him when the recruiting period opened up, so did Cal and Chuck Martin a couple of weeks ago. I interviewed him. He talked about he was just waiting on the head hog and Martin to kind of get the ball rolling because he's taking a bunch of visits. He's going to take more in terms of, well, then will he also visit Arkansas? Well, he was one of the standouts. I've been talking about him, how he dominated, was the MVP of that Under Armour Next Elite 24 All-Star game back in, I don't know, August, several weeks ago. And he has interest in Arkansas, but he was one of the standouts. I tweeted that out. And you see different, not just Paul Biancardi's list where everybody's looking at, but some of these other national recruiting outlets that put out some of these lists of standouts, and you see these names consistently. The other one I want to talk about, and I heard about, I got a tip that Jacob Lanier was really playing well, the kid from Arkansas, out at Arizona Compass Prep with Mika Murinen, their teammates out there. But Jacob Lanier, the 6'5" guard wing out of Maumelle, who's again at that National Independent Basketball School now, played with MoKan Elite 16 and under over the summer. It's interesting with him, On3 Sports still has him ranked 25th in the country. So borderline 5-star. Some of the other services, he's ranging 40-ish, 50-ish. I think ESPN when they just redid their rankings, he's around 50. But Jacob Lanier to me is a guy that I think it's probably closer to true where that 25 spot is than maybe some of these other rankings. And I think part of that is his numbers when you looked at playing at MoKan with another 5-star in Jalen Montnati, who Arkansas, Chuck Martin went out and saw, by the way, not that long ago. I tweeted that out. Maybe he talked about it last week. Another wing, 6'7" wing and a shooter, and a 5-star, top 20 rated 5-star. But I think Lanier's total production, when you look at scoring and some of that, the numbers are a little lower, even though he was the second leading scorer on a loaded team for MoKan than some of these other guys, and because he's not a ball-dominant guy. But his shooting efficiencies have been really, really darn good. They were really good. But what he did was, what he did back in June, he was the MVP of the top, one of the 2 MVPs of the top 30 game, the All-Star game at Pangos, which is loaded. Another 100-plus kids, a lot of 5 stars, high-level 4 stars. And Lanier really showed well there. Well, he's done it again at this Wooten's camp. Biancardi had him on that short list. He was one of the names of guys that stood out. And again, I had tweeted that a day or two before with I'd heard that he'd played really well in the 3-on-3 and 5-on-5 competition, that he really plugged in and showed really well. And so he put up numbers the entire weekend at Pangos before getting invited to that top 30 All-Star game. And then to get one of the MVPs in his shooting efficiency, this young man has just a beautiful stroke shooting the ball from 3. He's got all the little smooth moves of getting in his shot in the mid-range. Not the most explosive kid, but he's got plus length on that 6'5" frame. Definitely got the length factor, and he just does. He plays a smooth game, and I really like him. I know Arkansas has legitimate interest in him, but he's not at a point where J.J. Andrews, another player in his class from the in-state, who's still in-state at Little Rock Christian, has that Arkansas offer. Jacob Lanier does not. I know Arkansas staff, I know they're keeping an eye on him. There's interest there. They were out to see him and Mika Murinen. Remember, it was Calipari and Shin Coleman that saw them in that first weekend of the recruiting period that opened up in early September. It's almost been a month, about 4 weeks now that recruiting period's been opened up, and Arkansas is crisscrossing the country. But you pay attention to the guys they went out and made a priority on early, especially. And Lanier's a guy that they put eyes on, and Calipari did again earlier about a month ago. So those were 3 names I wanted to talk about on Biancardi's list that stood out at this Wooten's camp. Remember, NBA scouts and the folks that make decisions on how these rosters for the McDonald's All-American game are put together. A lot of it's based on your rankings. A lot of it's political. A lot of it's, are you related to somebody? Some of that stuff plays into it. But to see a guy perform well, these guys perform well, I think it's a no-brainer. Acuff Jr. is going to be on that McDonald's team. I'll be surprised if Abayev is not invited as well, the way he's going right now. 6'7", versatile wing, can play on the ball, sometimes as a point forward. Man, I get carried away with recruiting. We're 30 minutes in. My fantasies about making this a 40, 45-minute segment are out the window once more. I missed the comments as usual. But so I just want to wrap up the recruiting part. This I'll do quickly. Arkansas, we know, has 3 visitors scheduled for later on in October, the 18th through the 20th. The Razorbacks will be hosting LSU. We know Arkansas is hosting Tennessee when Malik Thomas is supposed to be on campus this weekend, the 18th to the 20th. After a bye week in football, Arkansas's back home hosting LSU, a ranked team. But you've got Chris Sinek Jr., a top 10 rated 5-star in that 2025 class, 6'10", pushing 6'11", combo forward, another one of those, versatile guy. Kingston Fleming's a 6'2", 6'3", point guard, probably one of the better, maybe arguably the best facilitating point guard, lead guard projected out of that 2025 class, a top 20 rated 5-star out of San Antonio. And then class of 2026, J.J. Andrews, Arkansas, top ESPN has him ranked the 15th best player in the country in that 2026 class. Local kid, dad would be a legacy at Arkansas. His dad was an All-American offensive lineman, Sean Andrews, before being All-Pro in the NFL. But J.J. Andrews, 6'7" wing at a Little Rock Christian Academy. I'll be going to practice out there this week to put eyes on him again. I've seen him a lot. I'm ready to see those guys again. But J.J. Andrews has the visit for that same weekend as Sinek and Fleming's, October 18th to the 20th. He's already taken visits to Missouri. I think he was just on the campus at North Carolina State. That's expected. He's got Arkansas mentioned. I think in November, he's got a visit set for LSU and then Marquette after the first of the year. So he's class of 2026, no rush on him, but to get him on campus for a visit, I think is really big. And then there's that Kansas exhibition game, the 25th, which is a Friday in October, and Arkansas's football team will be on the road that Saturday at Mississippi State. Still waiting to see what plays out with visitors. I've told you guys for a while that Caleb Wilson's had a post-September visit. Nothing's gone public on it, and I don't have anything to detract that says, well, that's probably not going to happen. But I do see momentum for other places in his recruitment. And until that goes public, each day that goes by on that visit, I start to wonder, is that going to happen? You know, I still have people that think Arkansas is among the leaders for Caleb Wilson, the 6'9" combo forward out of Atlanta, Holy Innocents High School. Arkansas's made him a priority, but it's gone kind of quiet in terms of the Arkansas part of it for a while, in terms of what gets out publicly. What you hear behind the scenes, you know, I've had some people think there was some momentum for Kentucky. Well, that may be true, may not end up being true. He's got some other visits he wants to take that's been publicly talked about lately. And again, Arkansas, not so much. If someone had the Clutch Agency comment here, we've talked about all this. We've really gone down that rabbit hole. All right, we're going to move off of recruiting now, 32 minutes into it. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. We appreciate you. Glad to put out the content. Hope it's worthwhile for you. You know, what stood out to me, I think, the most yesterday, when you talk about John Calipari's, again, what I call his second State of the Union, State of the Hoop Hogs address, at Bud Walton Arena, met with media, really another long presser. It's his third, press conference. He had the introductory press conference when he was hired all the way back in early April. Then you had late July as a recap of the summer workouts. Arkansas went on the little brief summer break before the fall semester started. And so we got some good stuff out of him then, and we got a lot of stuff yesterday. And really, when you look at Calipari, it's a lot of big picture stuff. He's still introducing himself, in my opinion, when I really hone in on these press conferences so far. Now, I've had him in other scenarios. I've had him in different media scrums. I interviewed him in Hot Springs just a couple of weeks ago. He's down there for a coach's clinic. Got some good stuff out of that. Was able to confirm Tyler Ulis officially as the 5th assistant being hired, and some other stuff. Some of the stuff he in another event, he was at Little Rock, a fan event, after he was hired, after the introductory press conference, a week or two later, however long it was, got to interview him after that. So I've had him in different spots just outside the press conference. But it's still, to me, there's still a difference between the big picture stuff he talks about and the actual details. And we haven't gotten a ton of details. And that was where I'm going with this. That was kind of the theme for me, is we're still looking for more details, because I'm a details guy. I want to know the nuts and bolts. I like the big picture stuff too. I like the culture stuff. I think it's great. But I want to know who's available, who's doing well, what's going on up there? What does it look like? And so he gave us a little bit of that, not a lot. Kevin doesn't want to talk about Clutch. Well, we've done that. I mean, I've done it so much, and I've spent so much time on recruiting. I probably, next time we get on here for recruiting, thanks for the comment, we'll talk more about Caleb Wilson, and I'll repeat some of the Clutch stuff. It's not different. But anyway, so getting back to the press conference, I think I'm going to drill down on the stuff that stood out to me most, only because I'm looking for details. And so I'm going to cling to those, and I'm going to start with those. And in the player updates, there weren't much. It was really DJ Wagner and then the three main front line pieces. And really, it was mostly DJ Wagner and a little bit of Big Z, and then just a fragment for Trevor Brazil and Jonas Adu. But the thing that, what did we do the last time we were on a week ago? I brought you intel, and I had some specifics. I said the names that keep coming back on these behind-the-scenes conversations with former, I can't say who all of it is, but it's people that know. And I mentioned 5 names that I kept coming back to me. I kept hearing a lot in recent weeks, and I wanted to get into it. And DJ Wagner was one of those 5 names. DJ Wagner was one of those 5 names. And what did we say last week? What did I say? The thing that kept coming back was whether or not this, however high the ceiling is, the floor is really high. And at minimum, you're getting a quality veteran lead guard, floor general. And when you heard Calipari speak about DJ yesterday, it was almost like he was trumpeting exactly that idea and that notion, because he said he's the unbelievably coachable. The first voice you hear when you walk into the performance center is his, and that's what leaders do. You want your leaders to be, hopefully they're vocal if they're a lead guard and they are a leader. Hopefully the team's listening, but you can't be, people can't listen if you're not using your voice. And so those are positive things. Calipari reminded people, look, this guy before he got hurt was SEC Freshman of the Year of the week 3 times before the injury. And he was playing really well. Then, it impacted his shooting efficiency. Other guys rose up to be one and dones in first round and lottery picks that play backcourt positions at Kentucky. I think the 2 things are the takeaways here. One is when you looked at his numbers, 10 points, nearly 3.5 assists, a 3-to-1 turnover ratio somewhere thereabouts, or 2 I don't remember exactly what it was, but I do know that the guy was steady. He was a solid contributor, even post-injury, even though his shooting splits and his 3-point shooting was not very efficient. He struggled with that. He busted Arkansas up in Rupp. I think he had 19 points and hit 4 threes, shot well from 3, but wasn't a very good Arkansas team. But the point is, he was a steady contributor at the lead guard spot. And for a true freshman to have that assist to turnover ratio, and then to hear that he's gotten stronger, more athletic. Calipari said he thinks he's added to his athleticism, and that he's a trustworthy guy at your lead guard spot. I think as much as Calipari talked about him yesterday, you get the sense that he has confidence in what he brings to the table. You're always wondering about an ankle issue, but Calipari didn't focus on that. Not directly anyway in terms of talking about DJ Wagner. So I think it's really important to remember, the last time I heard a coach talk so strongly about their lead guard and the guy they were going to trust a lot with the ball, the last time I remember that was Eric Patrick Musselman in his 2nd season talking about Jalen Tate. That was his first Elite 8 team, and I think it was his best team. I think that team with Justin Smith, Moses Moody, who for whatever reason, only 1 year at Arkansas. It's one of the greatest seasons ever for a Razorback. He and Scotty Thurman have arguably you can rank them how you want. Moody might have the best freshman season ever as a Razorback. He was incredible, but that team was really good. But Jalen Tate, even though he wasn't in the true sense of the word, natural point guard, he was facilitator first. He was really smart. And even though he wasn't perfect, he really made that team go. JD Notae was a different kind of a lead guard. He was one of those, you get rich on some plays, you get really poor on other ones. But overall, Arkansas needed him. He worked for what they needed. But I don't know that he was the most reliable lead guard in terms of facilitator and some of these other things you want when you've got other really good pieces around it. You don't need that guy to wear a cape. Sometimes Arkansas needed JD Notae to be more than just a lead guard. With Jalen Tate, he was perfect for that role. And Eric Patrick Musselman, EPM, spoke glowingly about that. And I don't remember him ever talking about a lead guard like that after that. Not saying he didn't say really good things about JD Notae and other guys, but not in a way in the same spirit. And so the only reason I bring that up is you're hearing Calipari talk about it. To me, this is so important because Arkansas's got really good pieces around him. They don't need him to have the highest ceiling in the world. It may be great. This guy's ceiling may be higher than any of us can see because of what he went through last year. But the floor is high. The floor is high. The more I hear, and then to hear Calipari validate some of the things that I'm getting behind the scenes really goes a long way in terms of the impact he can have and what he's already doing. So I don't want to over dramatize what he went through. Players go through injuries; they got to deal with it. But at the same time, if this guy's healthy and he's making the strides that I'm hearing he's making, at minimum, you've got a guy that's trustworthy to run your team. Because I'm going to get into some of the team details he gave. It wasn't a lot, but I'm going to go through the stuff that had fangs and hair, stuff that I could sink my teeth into, and the big picture stuff and the culture stuff. That's great. We're going to talk about that too. But when we talk about having a lead guard on a team with multiple players that could be one and dones or projected for the draft, whether they've been in college for a while or not, then it tells you several things. I can count on this guy, and he's got good enough talent and production around him where he doesn't always have to be the guy scoring or whatever it is. And so I think to me, that really stood out. What I thought about Arkansas, he was one of my question marks, only mostly because of the ankle. I figured he would progress in terms of development and bring some of those qualities as a true freshman where he took care of the basketball and got other players involved. And now that's starting to get momentum, this idea that at minimum, you've got a really good presence in your backcourt to lead things. Boogie Fland is going to have a role in this team. He's also going to be a guy that's on the ball. They're going to split some duties there. They may be able to play some together, but DJ Wagner, having been through the SEC, despite the shooting issues from three, I think brings some real value to this team already based on what we're hearing. And again, because of the stuff around him. Now, Big Z, he talked a little bit, Calipari did, about Big Z. Asked about his development and wearing the boot. He said, yeah, Big Z was dealing with that. So were a couple of other players who have since returned. And then he says, we got a couple of guys that may miss a week or two, but I'm not really concerned about that. That's what Calipari said. So, a week or two, you're getting into your exhibition season here. That might mean in some of these tip-off tour events, I don't know how much on-court stuff they're going to do. It's not going to be like a red-white game. Or an intra-squad scrimmage. They said he might have some mini practice stuff and some 5-on-5 and drill work. But if there's guys out a week or two, we might not see guys. We might figure out pretty quickly who's not on the court if that timeline affects that a week or two. Well, if it's only a week and guys are ready to come back and go through practice drills and things like that, then by the time we get to mid-October when they have those two events back-to-back days on a weekend in Hot Springs and Pine Bluff, we might see everybody. Or the week or two might impact a couple of guys because that's how he framed it. He didn't mention names other than answering that Big Z, we've seen it on the social media, he's back at practice. And he just talked about it 7-2, he's gotten stronger, but his conditioning, he needs to be in the best shape of his life. Conditioning is something that Calipari talked a lot about, and being able to play fast and teaching guys how to run. But with Big Z, he talked about, he mentioned in the same breath Trevor Brazile and Jonas Adu. Really, that's your front line depth. I think Adu Thiero is a 3-4 combo. He can help you on that front line and in certain lineups or small ball rotations. But those are your three guys that can all play the 5, and then also a couple of those guys at least like the 4 in combination with one of the other ones. But with Big Z, he's talking about his progression. And so, when I look at those guys, he mentioned Trevor Brazile and his athleticism. They want him to be more of an attack guy. Well, what do we see when we look at photos and videos? Trevor Brazile has beefed up a little bit. He's added some good weight, especially in the upper body. And if they're trying to get him to attack, that's going to help him, because what did we see? What did our eyes tell us? Yeah, he battled injuries, but he kind of shied away from contact. And so he's a guy that would go up and he could give you a double-double with some blocks. But most of that was length and athleticism, not playing really with physicality and challenge guys, bumping them chest to chest or taking their contact and hanging in there and still blocking the shot. It was mostly, in space, that kind of thing, because of his athletic gifts. And so the stronger he gets, the more he can probably deliver as an attack guy. And then that helps round out his game because we know he's got the soft skills. So I thought that was just listening to Calipari say, want him to be more of an attack guy. They're working on that. And when I went through the 5 names last week of guys that I keep hearing have stood out, I have heard Trevor Brazile, but I had another source after we were on last Wednesday who's gotten a little bit more information on Brazile, and that he's really a fit for what Calipari wants, and that this thing there's some kind of symbiotic thing going on here where Brazil's starting to figure some things out and starting to deliver on some of the stuff that they envisioned for him. And if you remember back when he was in the NBA draft combine in Brazil, I was talking to an NBA scout that said, look, he's got some good stuff he's showing here. He needs to go back to school. And the best place for him, this is when he was in the portal. We had no idea what he would do. Would he stay in the draft? If not, he was in the portal, is probably going to transfer. He said the best spot for him and for what he is John Calipari. And I told you guys that. We talked about that. It's been months, but that was one of those talking points about Trevor Brazil. And the more I hear, the more this fit seems to be working right now. I mean, it's got to translate to the court and what's going on in there. But if I didn't mention, and I didn't, among the 5 that have stood out, I was told strongly, maybe add that in there this week, that Brazil's actually one of the guys that they've liked what they've seen. And Calipari's touched on it. He says, you're better than I thought you were. That stuff, the exchanges he had with Brazil, it's not a shocker. It's not like I'm breaking a ton of news, but just giving a little bit more, filling in the blanks a little bit, or the gaps. And then he talked about Jonas Adu and being able that guy that's been through the wars and being able to handle what's going on that front line in terms of physicality. So those were the player updates. He didn't say much about Brazil or Jonas. That was where kind of the talking points. Big Z a little bit, and he's glad he's got big Jonas Adu to compete with, because that's what he's going to see in the SEC and some of these other big time matchups. So the DJ Wagner stuff I thought was what stood out the most in terms of what little he said about players. He said more about him. All right, injuries again. Calipari just kind of wrapped it up. He mentioned, Big Z was dealing with it, but returned to practice, as did 1 or 2 other players. Well, we knew that because last time we were on, I talked about the videos I'd seen where Jonas Adu, who we'd also seen in that photo with Nolan Richardson in a boot, I saw him in some defensive drills and some of the cut-ups on social media video from practice that the university put out, the men's basketball program. And unless they were using old footage pre-injury to trick us, I don't think that's the case. I think those were almost real time. Then he was back. And so Calipari, without mentioning names, said, we got some guys back. Well, he was one of the guys back. What we don't know is he also now one of the guys who's not back, and he's among the couple that'll miss a week or 2, because he didn't give us names. That could be just about anybody. Unless somebody knows specifically, he didn't share that. So not a whole lot of detail, but at least those are the things you want to know heading into the season. Who's available? Who's standing out? What are guys doing? What are you getting from them? He didn't talk about his freshman yesterday. We didn't hear about Nelly Davis yesterday. And he didn't really, I don't think he went into Adu Thiero much. He might have mentioned his name when he was talking about guys who followed him over from Kentucky to Arkansas, when he was asked about, how that continuity is helping with other guys and getting other guys acclimated, which he didn't put a lot of emphasis on that when he was asked about it. He goes, look, these guys are still new to each other. Some of them may know me, but they're new to each other. So it's still one of those things where it's not necessarily just because of that, something that bodes, that guarantees anything in terms of everybody doing what they're supposed to do now, or at some juncture in time where they're still figuring things out. Because he did leave this idea they're still trying to figure a lot of things out. And he gave those broad strokes when he talked about it. When he talked about the team stuff, really, as much as the things that I keep hearing from him prior to this press conference and during this one, conditioning, he says he really starting to feel better about the physicality they have to be able to play the defense the way he wants to play it. Defense was a problem at Kentucky last year. It's been not as good over there for the last several years. The offense was incredible last year. But he says he thinks he's got guys that are fit. So we talked about Big Z at 7'2" has gotten bigger. Trevor Brazil's added good weight and strength. Jonas Adu's probably, if you picked one of those guys coming in, maybe the more physical of the group, although he had his struggles against Zach Edey in a couple of matchups. Who didn't? But some of that stuff was a little bit glaring at times. He's going to get tested against Hunter Dickinson in that Kansas exhibition game here in late October. But for him to talk about the conditioning and teaching guys how to run, the physicality for defense, but then when he said offense, he keeps saying the same 2 things, and he uses different words sometimes, but throughout the press conference, more than once, he talked about it starts with playing fast and sharing the ball. And way back, I don't know, several weeks ago, I had a source, and I shared this on one of these segments, that if you look at, there were four things that were going to be critical to his offense. And it started with the first two things were primary and secondary transition, and then getting into dribble drive offense. If that doesn't work, with some sets to follow, certain sets to follow. So kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, with 1 and 2 being really important. He keeps talking about playing fast and sharing the ball. And then he said, yeah, and then we'll have some sets, we'll run some action. So what he's really talking about is, again, I said when he was hired, before we had heard him talk to this fan base, my recollection covering these teams in the SEC, his best teams always excelled in transition and typically on the glass. But transition always stood out to me because in tight games, his teams were just a little bit better and getting easy scores. And there were stretches of games. I can remember some Arkansas games that were close that Kentucky pulled it out. The game he was thrown out of and keeps referencing in year one for Musselman comes to mind. Kentucky got runouts at the end of the game. That was the difference in that game. Arkansas had a lead for a while. And when he got thrown out, it looked like Arkansas might win. And then Kentucky changed the whole thing at the end. A lot of that had to do with just getting out in transition. Some of it wasn't, easily recognizable transition, because if it's not primary, a lot of times you might lose sight of the fact that secondary transition is so important, where the defense is either partly back or mostly back, but they're not in position, they're not ready, and you attack it. And it's basically a way to score in transition. And so he keeps talking about play fast and share the ball. That's what he's talking about. And so with this group, you're going to, I think you're going to see an emphasis on really trying to strike early. Playing fast, you can have really good pace in your sets. But I think when he talks about it, there may be some of that, but what he really is talking about is getting those advantages off your defense and even after made baskets. And so we'll see about that. We'll see. But he said since they've returned, practice ramped up to 20 hours per week starting last week around college basketball. That was the way the NCAA calendar works. And so you really expanded things. But since they got back to campus and there was still some limited practice when the fall semester started back in September, or was it August? They got back in August. Yeah, late August. He said they got to their 5-on-5 and defense and offensive stuff they're working on. So they didn't work on that stuff in the limited practice in June and July. They didn't. What they did then was they did a lot of individual development stuff, and they did some competitive stuff, but mostly drill work. Now they've started to expand it, which you expect at this time of year, but he confirmed that. So he had a little bit of detail there. One thing he talked about, it stood out. It maybe more as a joke. I don't know how much he was joking. He says, I don't know who's going to inbound the ball yet. Well, there's more than one way to do that. And he talked about having different, position players do it. And maybe they haven't decided on who's going to be their primary inbound guy. And they may have guys for different situations. I've seen that before. But I didn't focus as much on that other than it's, how big of a deal is that really? I don't know if he's using that as an example of we've got a long way to go. I think all teams have a long way to go this time of year. Even veteran teams still have things they're learning. There's some veteran qualities here, but this is a new team in terms of guys playing together, except for the 3 he brought from Kentucky. But those guys weren't really stars yet. Some of them may be X factors, but even there's some unknown commodities there. So is he telegraphing? There's a lot to work on, and he used in a bad way, and he used the inbounds. I don't know who it's going to be as the example. I don't know that I think that. The other thing he talked about when he's talking about team stuff, he talked about the exhibition season. He went through all that. We've gone through the dates. But, Pro Day is coming up on October 9th. That's a week. That's next week, on Wednesday of next week. So you'll have 30 NBA teams in there. We know what Pro Day is, showcasing your team. There'll probably be 5-on-5 on that. And I will get feedback from that, and I will jump on here and we'll go through all that. But you got Pro Day on October 9th. Then that weekend, Saturday, you're in Hot Springs, Bank OZK Arena for the tip-off tour events. Calipari really went into the culture of the program, and also the community service stuff and the Good Samaritan's Feet, that charity where the team, they're going to give away 3,000 shoes both at Bank LZK at the Hot Springs tip-off tour. Then the next day, October 13th, a Sunday, at the Pine Bluff Convention Center, another 3,000 shoes is part of this. And his players are involved, and says it's good for the community and it helps give back, but it's also enormous for his players and his team to be involved in understanding what it means to be part of a community. So I thought that was really good, hearing about that. But so you got those two events. Then the Kansas game at Bud Walton Arena, that'll be a big deal. October 25th, again, the football team the next day is on the road at Mississippi State. But when he started going through these exhibition games, TCU a week later, November 1st, on the road at TCU. Then he talked about the Lipscomb game and opening that up. We know Lipscomb took Arkansas to the wire. I thought Lipscomb was the better team that day in North Little Rock last year, but lost in the final minute. I mean, it was one possession game. Arkansas was trailing, got a late bucket in the paint. I'm trying to remember, was it Tremont Mark? I don't remember who it was. Mark had an off game. Who scored that bucket? I'm trying to remember. But it was a crazy game, and Arkansas barely found a way to win it. Lipscomb is a well-coached team. And Arkansas opens November 6th at home, a Wednesday, a few days after that TCU road trip. And then Arkansas is back off its home court to open up against Baylor, second game to close out the opening week of the season, November 9th, on a Saturday against Baylor, the third Big 12 team in a span of 15 days. The first two, obviously, are exhibition games. What I thought was interesting was when he starts talking about, he keeps reminding us, it wasn't just in this press conference. The prior one, he did the same thing, and he's done it before. But when Calipari talks, he reminds you his team starts slow, and they hit some bumps and have some snags, and then it's a much different product and a better product as you move through get closer to the final. He didn't use the word the third of the season, but as the season moves along and as you're getting to the back end of it. So he's kind of telegraphing. He said that you might have some spills in some of these games. And he goes, but that's what you might need to know where you are, as opposed to loading up on beating D2s in exhibition season and just having strictly cupcakes in your first several games of non-conference play. We've seen Calipari teams at Kentucky struggle with mid-majors, lose some of those games, and then they go on and are top 1, 2, or 3 in the SEC pecking order. We know the postseason, the last handful of years, but over time, over a long period of time, Kentucky's been really strong with a very few outliers in terms of league play, national recognition, and rankings, and how they're perceived going into the NCAA tournament. And so his point is, yeah, we may hit some snags, but if he's consistently doing that as an on-the-court coach, and those are the results, then he's saying it'll bode well later. Okay, I can buy that. But then I link it back to his kind of vague team talking points when he said they don't even have an inbounds guy yet. And again, if he's just this, is he using that as an example, as a talking point of bigger issues? I don't think so. But if he did, it might blend in with some of this. We may struggle early while we're figuring things out. That happens with a lot of teams. We know with EPM, Eric Patrick Melsman, back-to-back Elite Eights, then a Sweet 16. You want to talk about postseason success in the last 5 years. 3 of the 5 he was here, that's what Arkansas did. But it got ugly as Arkansas got toward the end, some of those years of December into the early parts of January when they were starting league play. Some of that ugliness was in non-conference play at times. And so it happens. I mean, it happened, so these are talking points that aren't unexpected. They're not, they're not major turnoffs in terms of, man, this team may not be. No, I think the pieces are there. Individual pieces are there. Some of these guys have played together. Got the 2 transfers that came in that have no connectivity to Calipari previously or to Arkansas were Nelly Davis and Jonas Adu. Big time all league guys, friends, all-American type players probably, especially Nelly Davis, I'd say. It's probably more accurate there. But guys that are going to be able to produce and deliver, now that they come together, where's the chemistry? I think the DJ Wagner stuff is very encouraging, because if he's going to be that strong of a leader and be effective and productive, then it's going to help tie in the rest of it. It'll help tie in some of these other things. So the exhibition season, again, he went through it. We just went through it, and what he said, I found all that interesting. I think the big concepts, him talking about his philosophy as a coach. He says he's not going to change who he is. He goes, look, there are people that say I'm more of a player's coach and more worried about getting guys ready for the next level, and that I don't care as much about winning. He goes, that's not true. Look at the results. I agree with him. But he says at the end of the day, I'm not going to not be a player's coach for any means. And I agree with that too, because I think you have to be a player's coach at his level with the 5-star guys he's bringing in. And now the fact that he's balancing it with some veteran guys that are quality, and he's trying to not have rosters dominated just by freshmen, the learning curve. And I think the postseason in the last 5 years, part of that, I see nothing wrong with not changing his philosophy on how he does things in terms of how he recruits and how he tries to develop players. And he thinks that's big part of the formula for translating to wins. And so I see no problem. I mean, the fact that he made an adjustment, taking fear of the freshmen, tells me he's trying to address something that might be an issue as he sees it in postseason. But again, I like the fact that he's not changing who he is and how he handles things when he's in those homes, recruiting kids, and his philosophy of trying to get the best players and then focusing on their individual development. He's talked a lot about that. They worked on that in June and July. It's not just about getting the guys ready for it to be a good team, but for what they're going to face later on and what they're going to need to be able to do later on as professionals, as people in the community, all that stuff. So people in Big Blue Nation, I keep saying, yeah, he says all these things. Some of this stuff's broken record. Most of them love the community service stuff he does. They still talk favorably about that. But I think the biggest thing is, what have you done for me lately? And it's been the postseason that turned that situation around and why he left. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that that's a finished chapter and that he's the Kentucky part of it is. But his success in postseason, I don't know that we have. I can't say for sure that it's going to turn around, but I can say based on what he's done to affect change. Again, bringing in a more veteran roster, he's drilling down to 9 guys. That's a little bit different. So he's made some tweaks and changes, and he still seems like a guy with energy. He can talk as long as I can or longer. I like to talk. So does he. He's a great storyteller. We didn't get a lot of details. I tried to start with those first. But some of his other big concepts, he keeps talking about, building a culture, teaching guys how to deal with adversity, how to learn how to win, showing them the differences. If you do this is how you lose. This is how you win. So a lot of that stuff I think is pertinent. He's talking to the fan base still at Arkansas as though he's introducing himself. I don't see anything wrong with that. I don't know. He does a really good job of storytelling. And he reverts back to players with the big names, Derrick Rose, and the list goes on. Karl Anthony Towns, all these different guys that are, were MVPs or max contract guys or, all pros, not just all stars, but all pros. And so I think it's a great tool to use these. If he's going to have a press conference, people are listening. You had national journalists dialed into Arkansas's press conference yesterday, putting out stories. One of them reached out to me because they misheard something or had to miss something, and they asked me to fill in the blank on something that happened on it. And they were putting out content about this presser, national guy. So Calipari's a different animal when we're talking blue blood coaches, and he uses these opportunities to talk a lot and to disseminate the fact that, don't forget, I've coached this guy, this guy, this guy. Not that anyone's going to forget, but you've got young players, you've got family members who may not have always been that locked in on basketball, and now their kid's really good, and now they're starting to feel all that out. They know who Calipari is. I don't think it hurts reminding people who has come through those doors in his tenures at Memphis, at UMass, Memphis, Arkansas. The one thing dialing back, and I want to bring this up, and I forgot to mention it because I didn't write it down, going back to these Kansas and TCU games, Calipari talked about his relationships with Bill Self and Jamie Dixon, and he said, why not use this opportunity to have situational stuff like let's agree to play zone for a 5-minute stretch or press each other in this scenario. You're up 8, let's do this. I'm up 8, let's do this. That sounds less like a basketball game and more like a practice of some kind. When you look at training camp in football and some of these training camps where teams are on the, they have brawls at some of these, but in preseason training camps in the NFL, you'll see situational stuff they work on. They don't just get on the field and have a full blown, 4 15-minute quarters of actually playing it like a game. They work on situational stuff. That would be interesting to see. I prefer personally to see a game, but whatever it takes to get your team better and whatever these coaches agree on, and we get to see it, I think that's cool. So we'll see what happens with that. Calipari was asked about several staff members. Kenny Payne, who was a big part of Cal's success at Kentucky in the last 2 years. No success at Louisville, and so he's 2 years at Louisville as the head coach, and now he's back with Calipari. But look, this guy's been an integral part in the big man development with a lot of great big men coming through Kentucky and onto the NBA. He's been a hell of a recruiter. And Calipari basically said, look, I want you to be you. And don't ever, just remember, you're Kenny effing, I'm assuming he said, he didn't say the word, but Payne, just remember who you are. And so look, to me, this isn't a big change. I guess that all depends on Kenny Payne's outlook after being a head coach for a couple of years. But these guys had success together. Chuck Martin's been in his program. He didn't talk about him, but he's got continuity here. He talked about Tyler Eulis and the fact that he's an X's and O's point guard, and he's one of those guys that has a high basketball IQ and leadership qualities. He was a coach on the court when he played for him, and he's a big believer in Tyler Eulis, who's been in his staff at Kentucky as a student assistant, did the work over the summer academically, and now he's one of the 5 assistants, the 5th and final one in the way that it was announced formally and officially. But he's a big believer in Tyler Eulis. Chin Coleman, he was asked about Chin because he's made comments about him being a head coach somewhere at some point. And you see Chin a lot on the road with Cal. One of the things Cal cherishes about him and likes about him when you talk about the recruiting part is how good he is in the homes with families, with prospects and their families, how he's a grinder. He's just one of those guys that's not bashful about telling things like they are, and keeping things real. And I think that genuine quality is a big part of coaching. And so he sees in him some of the stuff that will allow him to take the next steps and move on and end up as a head coach at some point. So Chin Coleman, one of the 2 associate head coaches, he and Kenny Payne, he touched on that. Tyler Eulis was, Ronnie Brewer Jr. He had said this before, but he mentioned again, he said, look, this guy is a great ambassador. He's a connector. We had our fantasy camp, Joe Johnson. He's one of those guys that's connected to the past of this program. Ronnie Bird Jr.'s connected not only as a guy that knows people because he coached, but before that, he was a great player at Arkansas and an NBA player after that. So that made sense. He talked about him really kind of being a regional recruiting czar. He keeps tying him to connecting to spots like Memphis, where Calipari had success before, but the region, Texas, some other places that he sees Ronnie Bird Jr. as a bridge to help an Arkansas identify players. And so when we see Calipari drilling down on some of the 5-star, some of the big name guys that everybody knows about, that's not everything in recruiting. And we know that he's backfilled some of his recruiting with top 50 guys, top 30 guys. And even some of the 5-star guys right away, there's development on some of that. So the more people you have on parents that have connections with AAU coaches, some of them are saying, look, nobody knows about this guy now. Come out and see him. He'll be and a lot of these guys we talked about in the recruiting part were late developer guys, late chart climbers, late bloomers. Chris Sinak Jr. is one of them. Sean Abaya, to some degree, has been a recent chart climber. Kingston Fleming, some of these guys, some of these names that we went through that would fit into that category. And so this is why when you hear him say these things about Ronnie Brewer Jr., I'm seeing a utility player on the coaching staff. I'm seeing a guy that's feeling a lot of a fixer in a way, like a guy that's just there as a glue guy and to some degree with real value to the staff. And so you liked him jumping in when asked about these guys and the things that you heard say. I thought some of the staff stood out. He was blown away by Nolan Richardson's. We knew this, everybody's reaction when we saw that video when Nolan spent a few minutes with the team at the Performance Center, giving his pep talks, and just how strong Nolan still is in his 80s in terms of delivering a message. Concise, something I can't do. He's great at it, but just on point. And Calipari, you can hear the affection for that moment and the idea. Calipari said, look, I want him around the program. I want him on the front row, sitting on the front row courtside for the Kansas game. He's inviting Larry Brown, he said. Larry Brown was the Kansas coach that won a national title with Danny Manning back in the day, then an NBA coach. Roots through North Carolina in that coaching branch, but Larry Brown, a Hall of Famer, he wants him in the house. Calipari's got all these connections, all this, top shelf stuff and it all branches out. And so the more he gets into, even though he didn't spend a whole lot of time on the details about this team, some of this other stuff, the more he talks about it, the more you start to understand and get the rock star thing that goes on with him. Didn't UK go zone when Cal got ejected that game? That's a good question. That's a good question. I don't know that if I can, whether or not I can remember that detail. I do know that Kentucky ran out on Arkansas late in that game. I'll never forget it because I thought this is the difference. This is why this team was able to turn the table here. They had some good stuff they ran in their half court. They started knocking down shots in the half court as well. But Arkansas, they were wrestling back and forth, and then the plays that really stood out to me were just transition off of Arkansas's missed shots after free throws and made shots. I mean, Kentucky just gassed Arkansas late. Facts, Jack. Well, I'm not sure what did I leave some out or did I give too many? An hour and 10 minutes. I beat last week's an hour and 6. I'm going to end this now, guys. I really appreciate everybody. I probably left some stuff out in terms of the press conference that you wanted me to talk about, stuff that I was thinking about and maybe didn't write it down, or some of the details, but we can get into some of that. The next time we'll have more recruiting updates. If anything breaks, I'm jumping back on here if it's really big. Now we're on Malik Thomas watch. He's supposed to come in this weekend for a visit. He's postponed until he never shows up. It's not canceled. It's just postponed. I think I'm a little bit leery. Everything else looks good to me. If he makes it to campus, I think Arkansas is the leader. They may be the leader now. I got one source again that thinks Arkansas gets a commitment at some point, but he's got to get on campus. So we're keeping an eye on that. Any other developments? I hope you like the intel on Mika Murinen. And we dove deep like we always do, recruiting and some of the other stuff. All right, guys. I was trying to get to a comment or two. I missed a ton of them. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. One last plea. Please hit subscribe, like, share the content. I'm Kevin McPherson. Thanks for being here. Until next time, I'll see you then.